Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are taking a deep dive into a topic that you've probably heard a lot about, but one that's also surrounded by a lot of confusion and controversy: Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, or ADHD.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get a really solid understanding of what an ADHD diagnosis actually is. Then, we'll dig into its biological roots, where it comes from. After that, we'll get into the really complex medication question. And finally, we'll look at some powerful treatments that go beyond the pill.
You know, to really get a handle on what ADHD is all about, I think it helps to move past the dry clinical definitions for a minute. Let's start with a real-life story that really paints a picture.
So let me introduce you to Mark. When he was 14, his parents called him a human tornado. I mean, the kid was just constantly in motion, bouncing from one thing to the next. Mealtimes were a disaster. He was always knocking things over. His mom even said she couldn't remember ever seeing him just walk. He only ran. He was reckless, he was impulsive, and he'd overreact to the smallest things, like slugging a friend who just accidentally bumped into him. This story really captures that persistent, day-in, day-out challenge that so many families face.
And that brings us to the official definition. But here's what you really need to get. This isn't just about a kid having a ton of energy. To get a diagnosis of ADHD, the key words are persistent, frequent, and severe. It's a pattern that doesn't go away, and it's way more intense than what you'd see in other kids the same age. And the crucial part? It has to actually get in the way of their ability to function and develop normally.
So how do doctors actually diagnose this? Well, they use the official manual called the DSM-5. And what's so interesting is how it's broken down. To get a diagnosis, a kid needs to show at least 6 symptoms from one of these 2 lists: inattention or hyperactivity impulsivity. And really importantly, those behaviors have to show up in different settings, like not just at home, but at school too. It's about a whole pattern, not just 1 or 2 things.
And don't think for a second that this is some super rare condition. We're talking about roughly 5% of school-aged kids worldwide. To put that into perspective, in an average classroom of 30 students, you're likely to have at least 1 kid, maybe 2, who's dealing with these challenges every single day. That is a whole lot of families, just like Mark's, navigating this. All right, so if that's what ADHD is, the next big question is, why? What's actually causing it? Well, we've come a long, long way from the old and, frankly, harmful ideas about it being caused by bad parenting or too much sugar. The science today is crystal clear. The roots of ADHD are overwhelmingly biological.
And the biggest clue of all points straight to genetics. Check this out. Studies suggest that ADHD is about 76% heritable. That number is huge. I mean, to put that in context, it's one of the most heritable psychiatric disorders we know of, even more heritable than something like height. So yeah, if you have ADHD, there's a really, really good chance someone else in your family tree does too. And this isn't just some abstract genetic code either. You can actually see the physical differences in the brain. Brain imaging shows that kids with ADHD, on average, have a slightly smaller overall brain volume, and that some key parts of the brain develop a bit more slowly. We're talking about the frontal lobes, think of them as the brain's CEO in charge of planning and self-control, and the cerebellum, which helps with timing. This is so important. This isn't a character flaw. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder. It's how the brain is wired.
But you know, it's never just one thing, right? It's not all in the genes. The environment also plays a role, especially the environment before you're even born. For instance, research consistently shows a significant link between a mother smoking during pregnancy and a higher risk of her child developing ADHD. It's a perfect example of how nature and nurture can work together. Okay, deep breath. We've arrived at the part of the ADHD story that gets everyone talking and arguing. Medication. We're talking about psychostimulants like Ritalin and Adderall. And believe me, this is where things get really, really complicated. So first things first, let's just bust a huge myth that's been around forever. You've probably heard it, this idea of a paradoxical effect, that these drugs magically calm down kids with ADHD but make other people wired and hyper. Well, that's just not true. It's wrong. The research is clear. Psychostimulants help everyone focus better and decrease their motor activity. There's no unique paradoxical brain reaction going on here. So, the million-dollar question, do these drugs actually work? Well, the biggest, most important study ever done on ADHD treatment, the MTA study, gives us a pretty clear answer, at least in the short term. As you can see, medication all by itself was very effective, helping reduce symptoms in about 56% of kids. When you combined it with therapy, that number jumped to almost 70%. Behavior therapy alone, Not even close in terms of managing the core symptoms. So yeah, in the short term, medication can be a total game changer. But, and this is probably the single most important point we are going to discuss, when you look at the long term, the picture completely flips. It's a totally different story. While the immediate improvements are dramatic, follow-up studies found 0 demonstrated long-term benefits. I'm going to say that again. 0 demonstrated benefits when it comes to behavior, academic performance, grades, you name it. Those initial gains, as powerful as they were, just didn't seem to last over time. And on top of that, those short-term gains don't come for free. There's a list of side effects that parents really have to wrestle with, like loss of appetite and trouble sleeping. But maybe the most troubling finding from the MTA study was the potential impact on physical growth. The kids on medication were found to have gained less weight and grew less in height over 3 years than the kids who weren't medicated. So you put all of that together. You have powerful short-term effects, but no proven long-term benefits, and you've got some pretty serious side effects. It just forces you to ask a really tough question, especially when you start looking at the prescription numbers. And when you look at the data, wow, just look at this graph. It's not a gentle slope. From the late 80s to the late 2000s, the use of these drugs for children in the United States just went through the roof. We're talking an increase of up to 700%. That line is just an absolutely staggering climb. And that massive increase has led to this absolutely mind-blowing statistic. Today, the United States, which has just a fraction of the world's population, consumes about 90% of all the psychostimulants produced in the entire world. 90%. It's safe to say our approach to ADHD is a little different than pretty much everyone else's. Okay, so given everything we've just talked about with medication, all the questions, all the controversies, it's absolutely critical that we explore the other major tool in the toolbox, behavioral therapy. The main approach here is something called behavioral family therapy, or BFT. Now, even though the MTA study showed it's not as powerful as meds for the core symptoms of ADHD, it's excellent for dealing with related issues like defiance. The whole idea is pretty simple. It's about empowering parents and giving them a new playbook to manage behavior. And this isn't some vague, let's just talk about our feelings kind of therapy. It's super structured. First, parents learn to pinpoint the exact problem behavior, like arguing over homework. Then you clearly define what you want to see instead. And finally, and this is the most important part, you set up a really clear and consistent system of rewards for good behavior and mild punishments for bad behavior. The goal is to reshape the entire home environment. So this is where we land. ADHD is a real, biologically based disorder, no question about it. And we have treatments, especially medication, that are incredibly effective at controlling the symptoms right now, today. But the science also sends a very clear warning. Those short-term fixes don't seem to lead to long-term gains, and they come with risks. And that leaves us with the ultimate question. It's not just, how do we manage these behaviors today? It's, what are we actually aiming for in the long run? And is our current approach the best way to help these kids get there?